So I'm Audrius Pliksnys. I'm from Core Payments Platform Tribe. We're going to spend 20 minutes exploring our challenges in changing the bank or rebuilding the bank. One might ask, why bank when I'm from payments? And actually, if you want to change payment platform, you're actually going to impact all the bank. That's why sometimes we feel actually we are changing the bank in our journey. Okay, so 5 challenges and why? Why did we started this journey? You might say, okay, payments are working. They have been working for like what already mentioned, like 3 decades, maybe more, actually more, but like electronic payments. So we have working infrastructure. Potentially we don't need to change, but the reality is that over many years, our current system got complicated. It's complex. It's hard to change, and on the other hand, the innovation in payments is recently quite rapid, and actually the push from industry, from regulators especially, we need to do a lot actually to change. So it actually brings a lot of change what we need to do, not because we want sometimes, but because we need to. And on top of that one, like expectations are also like on the development in general, like we should become more productive. So our budget, you could argue, is decreasing because everyone is getting more efficient. But with that, a lot of change, all that combined, we actually end up not having that much time to innovate. And it kind of gets into this negative cycle where we basically limit our innovation. And I could actually illustrate the same with this drawing, where basically you can see like, we will go invest in running the bank until some breaking point. So basically, if we don't invest in the platform to optimize it, we will reach the point where we're not competitive, and basically competitors will definitely take advantage of that. So that's one of the reasons. It's not very specific to payments or banks. I could argue it's a bit maybe more applicable due to the change in the industry we're having in payments, but it applies to everyone. And yeah, let's jump. Like my first thought, like preparing for this talk is actually, let's ask ChatGPT what it thinks. And I actually got 5 answers quite quick, I don't know, 10 seconds. And you could read it through, you can try it yourself. I thought it's like, might not be worth spending too much time. And instead, just let's move to Q&A. So of course, jokes aside, I will present our challenges in core payments, but yeah, we can reflect maybe later a bit, like, does it match or not? It's just fun actually that AI can actually give some challenges for us and solve them instead of us. Okay, let's start with our one and only, the monolith. It's basically our biggest challenge to one extent, you could argue. You can see here mainframe Z13. There is nothing wrong on mainframe as such, don't get me wrong. Some might even call it maybe one of the first serverless systems. It was just not that popularly named. The problem is in monolith, is the way we built it over 30 years. It grew the complexity, the different priorities. What was important 20 years ago is not important now. For example, we used to optimize code like the assembler, so to save some time on compute, which basically means we save money to run, where maybe development was cheaper, where now actually we're trying to make things more easy, more decoupled, so we actually can change faster. So the landscape have changed, and we kind of accumulated a lot of depth over the years. It also works quite differently. So if you think the monolith is synchronous, it's consistent, and you could argue, okay, this is nice properties actually. It is nice properties till you start moving to decentral world, because in decentral world, actually that consistency, that low latency is actually something quite hard to work around. So you actually need to design for different things. And it's costly. That's also could be one of the drivers, though some people might argue about that one. And how do we address it? I tend to forget that we have actually the screen here. So first, domain-driven design. I think this is one of the key points which we employed quite early. It helps us basically to break our big monolith into some blocks and start actually to tear it down and concentrate. So finding some good boundaries. It's not exact science. I'm not gonna say like exact rules. So it is also quite a bit of a conversation, and that might change, but it actually helps us to kind of build domain knowledge in particular area and in smaller domains. On top of that one, like how do you break it? Some reference in the market helped us a lot. We actually had some consultant helping, basically looking at what are payment reference architectures. Based on that, basically splitting in the domains and top building our target architecture, which is basically our roadmap. So it's fairly high level, we can interpret, but it basically shows us where we want to go. And it's a good thing to invest on because we can always also benchmark the market as well as see how far we went. Agile mindset, something comes to mind as well, and it's not a secret, everyone is talking about Agile, but in a way here from Agile mindset, I'm not talking about Scrums or something, yes, you might employ it, but it's thinking how can you do it iterative, because 30 years of asset build takes time to change, so you need to think something small, more Agile, adopt, you'll do mistakes, we did mistakes, learn, and move on. And maybe it's connected to Agile, it's how do you basically pick some things, and we employ risk-driven approach, so basically you estimate like from risk perspective what makes sense, because it's actually very easy, and I'm not sure having been in some conversations, but you might drill in particular topic way too deep where you basically will be wasting time because it might not be material and you might postpone it. So that's a couple of key points. This is fairly much connected to engineering, and we could move more to a different perspective of the change, which is business, and how do we change business perspective to a problem, because you might solve problem on the IT, but actually it might be easier to solve problem on the business. And when I'm saying solving problem in business, I like the example of like consistency and balance as an example. The first thing you might tell anyone related to payments, saying, okay, I will give you not inconsistent, that's actually wrong, eventual consistent balance. And everyone would not like it. Of course, you can also say them, we'll invest more money that will cost you X, Y, Z more if you want consistent, and it has problems of like scalability, whatever. But actually, maybe you don't need consistent balance. You need consistent balance when you're maybe doing fund check while performing a payment. So when you bring more knowledge on the table, you can actually argue with business what makes sense, and in that way simplify your solution, make it more simple even from business perspective, and of course that takes less time to develop. Another huge challenge on the legacy platforms we build it over the year, what are the requirements? And the often answer we used to get from business is make it work as it used to work. And it's easy to say, it's maybe a bit harder to make. And this is something we also try to challenge, because if we build things exactly the same as it worked, we might actually have exactly the same problems as we used to have. So we need to mindfully challenge some of these old practices, and also push business to think more like what is important, what do they want. So if they don't exactly know, it means they are not on top of their business. This is something very hard, especially when you get some pressure on the deadlines, but I think it's one of the key parts to doing any transformation. I will jump to the next challenge. This is dependency hell. People know it as a tight coupling, maybe more in the IT world. It's connected to where I started, that we as a bank are at the core. And that actually illustrates quite well in the picture I have here. I illustrated we as in payments as having old rails. It's not named like that, but for illustration it fits well. We have a lot of upstream consumers, different channels, internal, external, different customers. Then on the other hand, downstream consumers, we have a lot of who are consuming basically the data we produce, building some reports, analysis and so on, statements, indirectly using us. That actually makes it sometimes very hard even to know who our consumers. So someone building report just doing SQL query. So there are plenty of downstream consumers and we don't know some of them. And even more, we actually have dependency to some services which we need to consume ourselves. And in one day, you could argue, bank does not move to decentralized platform. So it's a journey. So we'll definitely have some dependencies where we want some APIs and no one has them. This is something you need to play in any change. You can push some consumers, but it kind of becomes fairly quickly obvious that we're not gonna convince every bank to stop for X amount of months, years, and do the change, and we do a big bang to switch it. So here we try to employ different practice, like how can we scope? I think scoping was one of the big parts, like how do we build the MVP, basically, you can argue. And there are different ways of doing it, like we like that 80-20 rule, basically, like where you could say 80% of payments are performed by 20% of consumers. So actually, if you cover 80, like find a couple biggest consumers, they will most likely represent most of your users. And if you build APIs for them, basically the rest could join and use it. So this is from upstream. So there are a bit fewer consumers. And for downstream, we actually thought about it, and we basically ended up not pushing downstream consumers more actively to utilize our new APIs. We are actively informing them what we're doing, but we're not pushing to migrate together with us, because there are so many of them, and we anyways, like if you perform payment in the new Rails or old Rails, in your books, statements, and where if you do analysis, the data needs to be consistent, it needs to be there. So our approach there is basically to ensure bare minimum integration in the existing Rails, because we need to have that capability. And as I mentioned, there are too many clients we don't know of them, and we'll find out with the time. So basically, if you build a bare minimum integration, it's good enough to make us work. And our value proposition here is actually we'll build more rich API, which first, of course, it's going to be modern API. It's easy maybe to integrate. On top of that, it will provide extra value in the new Rails, better data, better correlation, traceability, and so on. So it's actually a value proposition for our consumers. So we are basically not paying them to move and use it. They will come to us hopefully and say, okay, we want to use your API because it's better. And then for what's left, basically, we will then we'll take it maybe more proactively of the consumers who are maybe too small or haven't moved later when we'll come to that stage. And like final on that integration point on our end, it is also equally important because we cannot live without core banking services like accounts, customers, fees, and so on. So of course our key is always actively to push for new APIs, but it takes time. That's what we know. And sometimes if we cannot align, basically we're building our own integrations. So you could argue we're doing extra job, but basically that's a bit of like ways to extend, but that's our way to achieving our goal, because we cannot do that without them. That was our third challenge, and the fourth one is maybe the closest one ChatGPT got. It's people. It was actually quite accurate down there. Like people is always something with value, and there is huge impact in that area. So what we have, like even from any project. First, let's start what we have. Key SMEs are most valuable people in the bank, in any team, and they are always busy. So to change something as big as payment engine, you definitely need to get a lot of time from them. How do you do that? On the other hand, it's also the technology transformation. You're moving from some mainframe, which right now is like PL1, COBOL, might be a bit of a JCL, to something in decentralized platform, in our case Java, and some tools on top. You might see it a bit before, afterwards. So you need to train new skill set. That takes time. And I would also argue there is natural resistance to change. I'm actually quite happy that in our tribe, I would argue we did not have that much resistance, because we're changing something which worked quite well, and any change brings kind of perspective. I need to do something. I need to get out of our comfort zone. I was perfect engineer on PL1, like, and how do I do Java? So there is this natural resistance. I think we did quite well, but it's also resistance not only within the tribe, but even outside. Now suddenly your consumers need to use new APIs. And finally, not the least, like, of course, we're building something new and we want to speed up, so we potentially want to increase our workforce. And increasing workforce is not easy. So our answers to all of these challenges, we kind of got a hand a bit of where bank was moving, the agile transformation we experienced a couple of years before. It's not connected to what we were doing, it just happened to happen. But based on that, we actually had an opportunity to transform our teams into dedicated teams based on our domains, which I already talked a bit before, broken down by domain-driven design. So we could actually build dedicated teams for our new platform, which has a clear goal, and actually that definitely helps to speed up things. On the training part and this transformation of we introduce a hybrid engineer training program. And what is hybrid, you might ask, is someone who can actually do both mainframe and Java. It is actually, if you think about, I already slightly touched it, our engineers who work here for many years are most valuable asset bank basically has, because they have a knowledge how payment works. And it's quite hard to find payment domain knowledge with that amount of experience. Learning language is comparably easy thing, or some technology, as long as people want to do that. So there is of course, that trade-off. And of course, maybe going to a bit more attractive technologies, because one might argue, why don't you do it on mainframe? Technically, there might not be problems with that, but that might not be attractive. So if you want to retain some people and attract new people, of course, you need to offer what's right now maybe more popular in the market. So it is actually quite important. And the final challenge I want to touch today is going to be infrastructure, new infrastructure. How do you build it? That's what we also started. The basics comes from, okay, we used to have actually everything ready. A lot of things are done instead of us. And in the new world, suddenly you need to do everything yourself. So our answer to that one is actually introducing a dedicated team for that, dedicated platform engineers, which are more concentrated and basically enabling the rest of the teams to move faster. And on top of that, also changing the, or not changing, introducing more end-to-end responsibility within the teams, or squads as we call them, like the DevOps methodologies and similar. Next is also gets interesting when you start building it, like on a paper. I'm an architect, so I kind of tend to spend more time on whiteboards, maybe now in the screen on some drawings. But like on a paper, things looks good. When you release it, things not always look like it is. So basically, the reality, you need that reality check. And this is nothing new. The answer is, of course, if you can, try to go live before with the smaller projects. Basically build the experience, and that's what we did. We did some API releases already quite a few years before. We got some learning, and now we also, based on that learning, we're improving our infrastructure. Experience gain is also like knowledge, which we basically need to build. How do we speed up? Because you could argue, can you learn experience? No, you gain experience. But you can speed up the process of gaining the experience. So one thing I already mentioned, but you could also look at the external sources. That's what we did, like getting some consultant or who can share the knowledge, do some workshops, and we could learn from them, or also getting new people in the team which already have experience. And actually that speed up process quite a bit. So if you also link that to that hybrid engineers, which I mentioned, and actually it might be very hard for full team of mainframe engineers go do Java, but if you actually smartly distribute it and everyone kind of help each other, it actually can work quite well. And one more thing I want to stress a bit more is actually hardware. So maybe it's actually, okay, nowadays everyone is talking about public cloud. In the banks, the topic was actually not that popular quite some years ago. And I even heard a lot of people saying payments are going to be the last to go to cloud. We're definitely not the last in the bank looking at it. But we also looked at some options where we go for physical hardware, and we build kind of our private cloud. It's a tricky business because it needs a lot of calculations, mistakes are expensive, lead time is big, and without expending much, it is basically the answer is public cloud. If you can actually go there, that's definitely a way to go, because you can try, get rid of it, no capacity planning because you can just run it. New technologies take time to learn, so basically this is from different perspective, limit technology stack. So of course, like I talked about a lot about learning, training and so on, but it's also you need to be mindful so you don't go like all the popular tech stack was possible on Earth. And every one of you most likely know that in our field, a new technology comes every day. So you need to limit your stack because it's limited amount of time we have, and we need to be mindful. Very quickly, this is actually tech stack we are running mainly, like more, but this is the biggest components. I'm not gonna touch it, name it. We can maybe have it either later in the social part or in Q&A.